What's up, y'all? It's your boy Kairos. Today I'm bringing you the Slayer build for Arms Warrior going into the first patch of the War Within. I think Slayer's going to be the best option for both Fury and Arms. I still have to mess with Mountain Thane a little bit with Fury, but I'm honestly really liking the Slayer build for Arms. You have a lot of pressure with it. It's non-stop, and it makes your execute damage and your overpower damage absolutely crazy, along with your Mortal Strike damage, because you're going to constantly be resetting your Immortal Strikes. And it can actually hit about 1,000,000 consistently without any modifiers, essentially. So to get into it, basically how it's going to work, you're going to be running all your normal Arms talents. You could dip out a Thunderclap and just go with Running Rend on its own, and probably go with some different talents, like something like this as well. But preferably, I still like the Thunderclap thing. It slows them. It deals actually quite a bit of damage. And it's something that you can use to apply rend on everything and slow everything. That way you don't have to use a global on, let's say, your sweeping stripe's hamstring. So something that makes this build really, really good that I'm actually really liking is the Unhinged. I believe Unhinged is nerfed quite a bit in PvP. I believe it's 60% of the original value. But the thing is on your modifier, each strike of Bladestorm deals an additional 20% damage across all targets. So my Bladestorm does 1.2 million. I believe in PvP I have about 7.6, 7.8 million health in PvP. Let's take PvP modifiers. Let's say that's 1.6. Now we're doing 60% more, because you can easily get 3 stacks of that Bladestorm. And you have Unhinged, and you have Sweeping Strikes, and you have, I believe you can get as many as 3 Mortal Strikes out with this build. Maybe it's just the 2, but it says every other damage you deal with Bladestorm, you get a Mortal Strike. Well, if you have Sweeping Strikes, that actually makes your Bladestorms actually hit like a train, which 4 arms does kind of suck, because the issue is then, okay, so how do you, if you're going to be bursting with Bladestorm instead of using it as a utility spell, what's going to be happening? So I got an execute proc, buff my next Mortal Strike. Mortal Strike, you literally, if you get a Mortal Strike proc, that's the first thing you're always going to press non-stop. That's literally your priority every time. I've got a free thing of sudden death, another sudden death, and this is part of the reason why I really like this build. So we have 3 stacks. We're gonna pop everything in this go. Pop absolutely everything. And you can see, I don't have details, so you can't really see the damage I just did, but assuming that all of your damage is there, so you get stacks overwhelmed, that's 12% more damage. The thing with Slayer is it's all passive things, but here's the thing with Slayer versus the other one, which is the Colossus. This has to be cast, so you have to stun them in order to basically get them. If they walk out of it, they can walk out of it. They can be pulled out of it. Now, Colossus does have some synergy with the bleeds, which is kind of nice, but my original issue with this was the long cast time anyway. Now, this does have some really good things, I believe, which will be really good into melee cleaves. But the chance that your Mortal Strikes are just going to flat out do way more damage. I mean, it's a 20% chance that you hit everything for 250,000, depending on how much armor they have. And if people are stacking, you just get more value from reap the storm, um, especially if you're using sweeping strikes, like I said. So you have two, basically, you hit two targets with mortal strike on sweeping strikes. Let's say that hits for 1,000,000. This hits again. That's, let's say, 1.5, 1.6 million damage. Um, and you're already gonna have bleeds on them, or your deep wounds. So the way arms mastery works, if you have deep wounds on them, that increases basically the damage you deal to them by X amount, which is pretty good. As far as fierce follow through, not really a good one for arms. I feel like when opportunist is going to be your best one, I believe it just makes more sense. It just buffs your overpowers by 30%. It's basically like, it's actually kind of huge. When overpower has its cooldown reset by tactician, guess what? You're going to be spending a lot of rage. You're going to be spending just an absolute ton of rage. So this is actually probably always going to be better by default. Anyway, your next overpower deals 30% additional damage, and if it crits, it deals a 30% additional critical strike damage. So that's already just, I believe crits, what, 50% PvP. So let's just assume that's just basic math, 45% increased damage on top of 3 bleeds and everything else. So there's a lot of things with that might actually have some synergy. This one might actually have some potential with maybe Unhinged, but then again, Blade Storm is kind of a long cooldown now. It's a minute cooldown, I believe, with this. Yeah. And that's... Arms is looking insane, because you just get a huge Blade Storm, and then you can follow up with a Sweeping Strike on Sharpen, and for 15 seconds, people are taking 50% less healing. And you're already going to be spending a ton of rage, so that minute and a half cooldown on Blade Storm doesn't really matter so much. Ravager, maybe it's got some value. I'm not really sure yet. Maybe in some melee cleaves it could be pretty hilarious because they're already going to be slowed by 60%. But again, I really prefer the latter. Something else that might actually have some... I'm kind of in between these two. This is kind of more of like an AoE talent because it just hits everything. I don't really care for padding damage, especially on a warrior. It's just a flat damage increase. Overpower deals 15% more damage, so 45% there. Let's assume it's 60 if it crits. Oh, and you actually have a modifier on this as well, so let's say 65 or whatever that will be. Huge overpowers, huge mortal strikes, because you have the chance to proc Reap the Storm, and you're already dealing 12% more damage from overwhelming blades, and you're already dealing X amount more damage from your mastery. So I'm doing 22.3% more damage. You have versatility. You have all these extra things that do more damage. So it really doesn't take that long to get stacks. Execute damage, critical strike chance is increased by 15%. I really enjoy that buff. Each time you press execute, that buff's going to go away. I feel like you don't get it as much as arms, but I don't really think it matters. So like, just do a full burst here. We'll just use Sharpen, just make this Blade Storm really fat, 1.2 million. And you can start to see where this build actually has some really good value. Want to spend our overpowers. And it's kind of a weird build, so you do kind of get priority of overpower versus a lot of other things, and you're going to be getting sudden death more. But I personally think it's kind of more or less kind of like playing DK. Frost DK in particular, or actually maybe more as Unholy, because you're meeting a priority system versus, let's say, a bit of it where it's like oh, I've got two blade storm, or I've got two blade storms like it was last patch, and I'm just gonna do damage until they just fall over. Is where this is, I have Mortal Strike, I have an Overpower. I'm gonna press my Mortal Strike on cooldown. Now it's more or less you want to be pressing your Mortal Strike on cooldown, but you also want to be using your sudden deaths on cooldown as well. Not much of a difference in the playstyle of arms, but it makes your damage more direct because now you have Reaping of the Storm, and you also have, let's see, Slayer's Dominance. Your attacks against your primary target have a high chance to overwhelm their defenses and trigger a Slayer's Strike, dealing 325,000 damage and applying mark for execution, increasing the damage they take from your next execute by 15%, stacking 3 times. Every 3 Slayer strikes you gain sudden death. Using sudden death accelerates your next blade storm, striking 1 additional target, max 3. Blade storm's total duration is unchanged. You heal for 15% of the damage dealt by sudden death, so you get some self-sustain. Marked for execution increases the critical strike chance of your execute damage and critical strike by 25%. Or by 15%. My bad. But everything, honestly, is looking towards to run Overpower with this build, and Overpower is a free spell, and it buffs your Mortal Strike damage, and everything else. It's just buffing all of itself, essentially. So there's no real difference between, let's say, Dragonflight and this expansion. So you're gonna burst, you're gonna do your thing, you're gonna get your blades up. You know, this is without the Blade Storm. You're just gonna be, this is basically your whole rotation. Literally 2 buttons. Thunderclap to try to get some proc, but no. Okay, we got a proc from that one. We got a proc from the Hamstring. You can still use Hamstring, especially if you're low in rage, to try to proc. Okay, I got another proc. I'm just going to use Overpower because I don't have that proc. Got a proc. Okay, now we're going to start to pop off. Low on rage again. I'm going to pop our burst. We're just going to go hard. Sudden death proc, sudden death proc. We're procking. You can just see where this build is just, the single target actually makes arms actually incredible when it comes to cleaving. It's basically like balancing out everything else and adding more damage to your rotation that's just passively there that actually adds a lot to your kill potential. So, and it actually has a lot of synergy with Storm of Destruction and Sharpened Blade. And that those are the 2 talents that are going to decide arms for the rest of the expansion if they keep it like that. Because especially if you go into a melee cleave with an Unholy DK or even a Demon Hunter or anything else really at all that cleaves. Hell, even Turbo. I know Enhancement has its issues right now, but Enhancement has a lot of healing too, and they have a lot of support, and they actually don't have terrible damage, but it's not great either. But there's a lot of things with this in general that are making Enhance and arms look really good together. You make the Enhance unkillable. You have self-sustain from your Ignore Pain, your Execute procs, because, well, you're already going to get Execute procs from your auto attacks, and also the chance that you get it from your Slayer strikes. So you have a lot of opportunity to get just a lot of sustained damage and a lot of cleave, especially with the chance that your attacks against your primary target deal X amount of damage, and the fact that you get Reap the Storm, it's 20% chance to do that. The more haste you have, the more of this you're going to get, because the more Mortal Strikes you have, the more rage you have, the more rage you spend, the more that Exhilarating Blows procs, the more that Battlelord procs. So it's actually kind of looking really good for arms. It's, you know, it's probably the highest single target damage arms build consistent wise. I would say Colossus maybe has a little bit better burst, but overall this is just a build that's just you're just grinding the enemy team down. You're grinding whoever you're hitting down. You just do non-stop pressure, and that's what is really looking good for the next expansion is consistent pressure and burst. And this build has both. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to bring this forward. Like, hey, this build's looking really good. I know a lot of people, there's still kind of, a lot of people seem to still be confused with the hero talents. And how they're all going to work. Of course, not all the changes are final, but we're getting really close where there's going to be less changes. And now that these are the changes that are here, or things that have been here for a minute in the last couple videos or whatever else, or, with the beta, pre-patch, whatever, not a lot has changed, and the talents are actually looking fantastic for arms, for Fury, and for even Prot Warrior. But anyway, guys, I wanted to show you guys this build with the Slayer, how it works. Basically, it's going to go all Mortal Strike and then overpowers your secondary and fill in with Execute, which it buffs all your talents. I mean, it actually makes all of your. It's not just you're basically just bleeds with a Mortal Strike, but all these other classes can do what you do just as good. But now it's like all the melee specs are kind of tied as far as CC and damage. Maybe not so much damage, but definitely in CC, which is, I think, a first in a long time. I think maybe Frost DK has the better stuns in the entire game right now overall. But yeah, it's just, this looks fantastic. I'm not sure how the numbers are going to look. Obviously, they might still do changes. Who really knows? They'll do some stuff around that as more and more people get into Battlegrounds and Battleground Blitz, I believe. It starts even before the season. I think it's September 10th or so, something like that. But still, guys, it's looking fantastic, and Arms is looking great. I might actually play Arms over Fury for this season because it's just so much more straightforward versus Fury that it's just, I don't know. It's a weird one because the Fury tree feels a little weird with how your rage works, and it just feels really slow, and our haste values are really low. Maybe later in the expansion it'll feel better, but even then, Arms just has so much front-loaded damage and sustained damage that this build is just going to even make it better, that it's just going to, you're going to overwhelm people. Your executes are going to hit hard, your mortal strikes are all going to hit hard, and you're just going to do endless damage. But anyway, guys, you have a good one, and good luck in the war within.